At my mother's homegoing service, my younger aunt pressed an ultrasound into my palm and whispered, "She made me promise you would see this before the final hymn." The print was old enough for the corners to have softened. A date crossed the top in blue ink, 17 years earlier. My knees did not buckle, but they forgot the floor for one long second. Behind us, my cousin's funeral program slipped from her lap and landed open beneath the pew. No one moved to retrieve it. The choir waited in black robes trimmed with silver. White lilies stood along the altar, arranged as if grief itself were expected to keep order. Aunt Simone closed my fingers around the image. "The rest is in your mother's church safe." Across the sanctuary, my husband, Reverend Julian Mercer, stood beside my mother's casket, with both hands resting on his Bible. He knew how to make stillness look like strength. When his eyes found mine, I saw no surprise. I saw composure already prepared. Then I noticed the name written beneath the date on the ultrasound envelope. Simone Mercer. Not Simone Carter, the name my aunt had carried all her adult life. Mercer. My husband's name. New Promise. African Methodist Episcopal Church belonged to my family long before Julian entered it. My grandfather helped lay the fellowship hall floor. My grandmother chaired Missionary Society. My mother, Odessa Carter, served as church clerk for 38 years and remembered every baptism, wedding, homegoing, and child who needed school shoes. I was 49 when we buried her. Julian and I had been married 22 years. He had served as senior pastor at New Promise for 12. I had grown up beneath its stained glass. I knew which sanctuary window leaked during hard rain and which cabinet held the linen reserved for bishops and funerals. My deepest desire in marriage was not admiration. I wanted my life to remain whole, family, church, marriage, memory, without being forced to choose which one deserved my loyalty. Julian often praised that instinct. "You have your mother's gift for keeping people together." For years, I received that as love. Only later did I understand that some people praise the strength they plan to use. During Mother's final year, she stopped meeting Julian's eyes. She no longer allowed him to carry church records into his office. I noticed. I gave both changes kinder names: age, caution, approaching grief. Sometimes a woman does not ignore truth because she is weak. She renames it because its real name would rearrange her life. Aunt Simone was 4 years younger than I was. My grandmother had remarried late, so Simone grew up closer to my generation than my mother's. At 28, Simone gave birth to a son she named Micah. She never named his father. The family accepted her silence because my mother insisted we would. "A child does not owe grown people an explanation for being born," she said. That part was true. Micah grew up at New Promise. He carried candles, played drums for youth choir, and sat beside Julian during men's breakfasts. Julian bought his first suit, recommended him for a church scholarship, and called him Young King. There were details I noticed without examining. Micah tilted his head when he listened, exactly as Julian did. He had the same narrow space between his front teeth. When his voice settled into Julian's lower register, Mother left choir rehearsal early. I did not ask why. I believed family peace required respecting closed doors. What I had not learned was that a closed door can protect privacy, or it can protect power. 2 months before the homegoing, I found Mother in the church office, sorting old benevolence ledgers. She held one page against her chest when I entered. "Some records should have been corrected years ago," she said. I thought she meant money. In a way, she did. But the deeper debt was not written in dollars. Mother planned her homegoing with the precision she once used for annual conference. She selected the hymns, chose Psalm 46, and requested that no one call her a perfect woman. "Only Christ gets that word," she wrote in the margin. She left 3 sealed instructions with Sister Bernice Hall, the church clerk. The third was marked, "To be opened after the family tribute and before the final hymn. Trustee Chair, Church Clerk, my daughter, my sister Simone, and Rev. Julian Mercer must be present." Bernice showed it to me in the church office while the congregation sang, "Great is thy faithfulness." The ultrasound remained inside my Bible, heavier than paper should have felt. "She changed the safe combination 3 weeks before she passed," Bernice said. "She said the church had protected a reputation long enough." Through the wall, Julian thanked God for Mother Odessa's integrity. The word reached me like water spilling over a rim. I asked whether Mother had requested him to preach. Bernice lowered her eyes. She asked him to preside, not preach. Yet the printed program named Julian beneath eulogy. Even at my mother's homegoing, he had adjusted the order to place his voice at the center. I did not confront him. For once, I would let the record speak before anyone explained it away. During the congregational hymn, Simone and I stood in the women's ministry room. "Is Micah Julian's son?" I asked. Her face tightened, but she did not answer. "Please do not make me learn it from a committee. I am following your mother's order," she said. Every time we told part of this story, somebody used the missing part to bury the rest. She sat beneath a photograph of the church mothers. I was lonely and ashamed. That explains my condition. It does not excuse my choices. He was your husband, and I crossed a line against you. No blame placed on youth. No claim that love had made them helpless. Simone said the ultrasound had been taken at 11 weeks. Mother found it in her choir folder and confronted them inside the church office before Micah was born. Julian admitted enough to keep Simone silent and denied enough to preserve his future. Mother chose a private arrangement. She feared exposure would destroy my marriage, divide New Promise, and mark Simone forever. What did the arrangement require? That I never name him, that he support Micah through church benevolence, that everybody call it mercy. Money intended for struggling families had disguised a father's obligation. This was not only adultery hidden inside kinship. It was the church's compassion account, turned into a curtain. Simone reached toward me, then stopped. "I am sorry. But Micah is not the shame in this story." She was right. A child never carries the moral debt of decisions made before he could speak. The service moved forward because church services often do. Grief may split a family open, but the choir still watches the director's hand. Then Micah walked to the lectern. At 17, he was tall, composed, and trying not to look toward his mother. He spoke about Mother Odessa teaching him to balance the church checkbook. She told me numbers do not become righteous because they are written beside a ministry name. A murmur passed through the trustees' row. Julian sat behind him in the pulpit chair. His expression did not change. Micah thanked Mother for never treating him as an embarrassment when adults became uncomfortable around questions. I looked at his profile and saw what I had refused to see in motion. The same pause before a difficult word. The same left hand flattening the lectern edge. Recognition is not always discovery. Sometimes it is permission to stop arguing with what your mind has already assembled. When Micah returned, Simone moved aside so he could sit between us. I placed my hand over the ultrasound inside my Bible. Light from the stained glass crossed the page edges in red and gold. Truth was becoming visible, but safety would require more than disclosure. It would require adults to refuse the old habit of making the least powerful person pay for what the most powerful person concealed. After the family tribute, Bernice reached the lectern before Julian could rise for the eulogy. Mother Odessa left a final instruction for New Promise. Julian stood halfway. Trustee Chair Lionel Hayes quietly indicated his chair. Bernice opened the envelope. My mother's letter did not reveal the entire secret. It revealed her part in keeping it. For 17 years, I helped protect a minister's reputation by hiding conduct that injured my daughter, burdened my sister, confused a child's identity, and misused the church's benevolence process. I called my silence protection. It became participation. The sanctuary went still. Mother wrote that grief did not excuse truth, delayed until death. She apologized for leaving me to receive what she had lacked the courage to tell me alive. Then she instructed the trustees to open the church safe and examine a file marked Mercer, Carter before Julian delivered any eulogy. If the documents confirm what I preserved, the church must not place another word of spiritual authority above the facts. Mother Clara removed her glasses and held them against her chest. Julian's Bible was closed now. I looked at my mother's casket and felt grief divide. I loved the woman who raised me. I was wounded by the woman who decided my pain was more survivable than public disorder. Maturity did not require me to erase either truth. The trustees opened the safe in the church office, while the choir sang softly in the sanctuary. I stood with Simone, Bernice, Lionel, 2 church mothers, the presiding elder, and Julian. I did not ask him for an explanation. The file held a second copy of the ultrasound, a handwritten statement signed by Julian 17 years earlier, benevolence payments, and a sealed laboratory report completed 6 months before Mother died. Bernice read the statement. Julian acknowledged an intimate relationship with Simone while serving as interim youth minister. He acknowledged that her unborn child could be his. He promised support and agreed not to seek public recognition as the father. The laboratory report removed the uncertainty. Micah Carter was Julian Mercer's biological son. A printer in the adjoining office clicked as it cooled. The ordinary sound made the truth feel final. Lionel asked whether Julian disputed the signature, payments, or test. No, he said. It was the only word I heard him speak that day. The ultrasound was the first preserved page of a life arranged around my ignorance. The presiding elder closed the file. This cannot remain a family matter. Church funds, pastoral authority, and congregational trust maintain the concealment. Simone asked whether Micah had to be told before everyone. No, I said. Public accountability did not require public injury to a child. The facts about Julian belonged to the church. Micah's first hearing of his paternity belonged to a protected room. Truth without care can become another form of power. We would not repeat that pattern. The presiding elder returned to the pulpit. She told the congregation that Mother Odessa's documents confirmed a long-concealed breach of marriage, pastoral ethics, and financial procedure involving Reverend Mercer. She named neither Micah nor Simone. Julian was removed from pastoral duties immediately. An independent financial and safeguarding review would begin. He removed his clergy stole, folded it once, and placed it on the chair. There was no applause in his fall, only consequence. He left through the side door with 2 elders. I did not follow. For 22 years, every serious conversation in our marriage had become a room where Julian controlled the vocabulary. Concern became accusation. Delay became wisdom. His silence became dignity, while mine became consent. I would not enter that room again. The district elder preached from Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. She did not promise trouble would disappear. She reminded us that refuge is not concealment. A church becomes refuge when truth can enter without the wounded being asked to leave. We buried my mother from New Promise that day. We also buried the agreement her generation had called protection. After the service, Micah learned the truth in the women's ministry room. Simone told him with a counselor and the presiding elder nearby. I waited in the church garden beneath a tree my mother had helped plant. When Micah came outside, he looked younger than he had at the lectern. Did you know? He asked. Not until today. Do you hate my mother? I am hurt by her choices. I will not turn you into evidence against her. He stared at the wet path. Do you hate me? No. The answer came without effort. He had been used to stabilize a secret he did not create. Gifts that looked like generosity had disguised responsibility. None of that made his life wrongful. I told him he owed me no apology and no performance of gratitude. You may decide what you call Julian. You may take time. You may be angry without becoming cruel. He asked whether he could sit on the garden bench without talking. I sat at the other end. That was the first act of family we chose after the truth. 2 people refusing to demand comfort from each other. Relational wisdom is sometimes less dramatic than reconciliation. It is knowing not to rush another person because the community is uncomfortable with unfinished pain. Water still fell from the roof after the morning rain. Time continued without demanding that we be ready. The women of New Promise did not treat care as a speech. Mother Clara sat beside me during every district meeting and wrote down questions when grief made my thoughts difficult to hold. Bernice copied the church records into a secure archive, so no page could disappear, because it embarrassed a leader. Cousin Beatrice packed Mother's church materials and labeled every box so I would not have to sort her handwriting while learning what she had hidden. Sister Renee from Finance gave Simone the corrected benevolence records and said, "You will not be named as charity for money a father owed." The missionary women prepared food for Micah without asking him to discuss his paternity at the door. 3 women rotated, sitting with me when trustees or officials needed statements. They did not answer for me. They made certain I was never alone with Julian. Care can protect records, hold a chair, arrange counseling, and refuse to turn confidential pain into fellowship hall information. Some members blamed Simone more quickly than Julian. Mother Clara corrected them. She broke trust, he broke trust, covenant, pastoral duty, and financial policy. Accountability should be measured by responsibility, not by which woman is easier to shame. Women are often assigned everyone's moral discomfort. One becomes the temptress. One becomes the foolish wife. The man remains complicated. New Promise decided complexity would not become exemption. The independent review lasted 4 months. It confirmed 17 years of irregular benevolence payments labeled as rent, school assistance, and transportation. The money reached Micah, but the church had been denied the truth required to approve it honestly. Julian resigned rather than complete discipline. The district declared him ineligible for pastoral appointment until restitution, counseling, and an ethics review were completed. New Promise recovered the diverted funds through repayment. Our legal separation became permanent. I never held a private confrontation with him. That was not avoidance. I had documents, witnesses, institutional findings, and the one answer he gave in the church office. I did not need another conversation where truth would be negotiated according to his stamina. Closure is not always a final exchange. Sometimes it is the decision that no further access is required for reality to remain real. The review also named my mother's concealment without erasing her decades of service. Love does not become faithful by editing the dead into saints. I could honor her generosity and grieve the fear that made her sacrifice my informed consent to preserve the church. I once called that sacrifice loyalty. Now I understood it as fear-wearing Sunday clothes. New Promise required independent approval for benevolence payments, disclosure of family relationships, and financial oversight led by women outside the pastor's authority. The truth did not merely remove a man. It corrected the structure that had funded secrecy. 1 year after Mother's homegoing, New Promise held a remembrance service. Purple irises stood at the altar, some fully open and some still becoming. Simone sat 3 pews behind me. We were not restored to our former closeness, but we had stopped confusing immediate forgiveness with honest repair. Micah had begun community college and still played drums on youth Sundays. He chose to keep Carter as his name. That choice belonged to him. I remained at New Promise, but released every role that existed only because I had been the pastor's wife. I joined the records committee, where facts are kept intact for those who may need them later. The ultrasound was returned to Simone after the review. With Micah's consent, she placed it in his personal file. It was no longer evidence stored against anyone. It had become part of a history he was free to understand in his own time. I kept my mother's letter as a reminder that delayed truth sends its bill to someone who did not choose the debt. Ephesians 4:25 tells us to put away falsehood and speak truth with our neighbors, for we are members one of another. That means my peace cannot be purchased with another woman's silence. A church's reputation is never holier than the people carrying its consequences. Truth does not cancel love, but it refuses to let love excuse concealment. Dignity is not pretending betrayal broke nothing. Dignity is choosing what will be rebuilt, who may enter it, and what must never be hidden there again. Faith does not require a woman to remain available to every person she forgives. Grace can release hatred while boundaries protect what truth restored. God met me not in preserved appearances, but in the clear place that remained when appearances were gone. This space holds stories for women who inherited silence and decided it would not pass through them unchanged. If this touched a truth you have carried, share only what feels safe in the comments. Sometimes healing begins when one woman says, "The secret was never mine to protect."